Now on BBC News, the latest business news from across the globe. Business Today.
A big budget U-turn as the Chancellor scraps plans to raise income tax at the upcoming budget, causing government borrowing costs to rise. Also coming up, Wall Street wobble. US stocks suffer the worst sell-off in more than a month, with tech bearing the brunt of the slump. And
my name is Michael Caine.
It is. If you can't beat them, join them. Why more celebrities are licensing their voices to AI companies, and what could be a turning point for the industry and its fractious relationship with Hollywood. Welcome to Business Today, and my name's Mark Lobel. We start in the UK, where the BBC has been told that Chancellor Rachel Reeves has decided against raising income tax rates at the budget on the 26th of November. And that had an immediate effect on UK government bonds, prompting a sharp sell-off. The 10-year gilt yield rising to the biggest daily jump since July, and the pound falling against the dollar. Gilts have eased slightly, and the pound has since recovered some ground. In recent weeks, Rachel Reeves had given strong indications she would increase the rate of income tax, a move that would have broken one of Labour's election manifesto promises. The apparent change of heart was driven by new economic data from the official government independent forecaster, which was more positive than it could have been, particularly on recent tax receipts. Well, the Chancellor has not yet commented on this apparent U-turn, but the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, was asked about it by reporters a little earlier.
The fact there's been this speculation about income tax rises show how challenging the Chancellor's position is in terms of the state of the public finances and her determination to stick to her fiscal rules too. But what we've learned overnight, I think, with the latest round of speculation is it's probably wise to stop speculating, wait for the budget. The Chancellor will make the decisions that she believes are right for the country, for family finances and the public finance.
Let's talk to Jane Foley, Head of FX Strategy at Rabobank, right now. Jane, how costly has this U-turn been?
Well, this morning, first thing, really quite costly in terms of not just the impact on the markets, but also potentially in terms of Reeves' reputation. Now, last week, of course, we had that unusually timed speech, and the market took that as an indication that the Labour government was going to break that election pledge and raise income taxes. Now, that settled the market. That pleased the market, because we all know that the government will have this large fiscal hole. And how is she going to close that? Well, she could cut spending, but Labour MPs aren't keen on that. She could raise taxes, which of course would annoy the electorate, but that seemed like the way to go. Or she could increase the country's debt, which is of course already at a very high level, about 95% of GDP, and that would not please the bond market. Now, last week it seemed as if the bond market had the upper hand and she wasn't going to do that. And this morning there were those doubts. However, having really annoyed the market first thing this morning, then we had the headlines that the reason that the Chancellor may not have to hike income tax is because the growth estimates, the growth forecasts were improved. Now, that has settled down some of those concerns in the market. Sterling is off the lows, the gilt market is off the lows. But there is a legacy to the news we had this morning. There's an impact on the Chancellor's reputation. What can the market trust? What is going to come out? So the market is likely to be a little bit spooked going into that budget on November the 26th.
What will the markets be watching now? And I know the Health Secretary said they're not to speculate, but they will be speculating for new targets from thresholds right up to mansion taxes.
That's exactly right. Now, one of the good things, if you like, about income tax, and it's a good tax, is that it is a big revenue raiser. It is one of the bigger taxes in terms of revenue raisers. So the market was of the opinion, OK, so if she does income taxes, then there's going to be perhaps less adjustment in other taxes. But if the revenue is not going to come through income taxes, then there's a whole string of other taxes that could be adjusted. Now, that leaves a much more confusing picture. Now, one of the reasons I say confusing is that the fiscal impact, all of these taxes can have an impact on things like inflation. That can have implications for what the Bank of England's going to do. It could have implications for the business community, like last year when we saw that increase in employers' national insurance contributions. That can affect payrolled employees because employers might choose not to have so many. So there can be a lot of secondary implications to a lot of the taxes that could be adjusted. And that leads to a pretty complicated picture, which would be less so if it were income tax rises.
Well, we'll find out in just under 2 weeks' time. Jane Foley from Rabobank, thank you very much for joining us. I want to take you to Wall Street now, where stock markets have had their worst day in more than a month. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost almost 800 points, or 1.65%. The S&P 500 was down a similar amount. But the worst hit was the tech-dominated Nasdaq, which ended down almost 2.3%. The sell-off was led by some of the big technology names that you've heard of, the likes of Nvidia and Tesla. Thursday's slump marked a resurfacing of fears that tech companies, which have soared this year on excitement about the AI revolution, are overvalued. Investors are also worried about the US economy and interest rates, as Michelle Fleury reports from New York.
Well, I don't think there is a tech bubble, but I think there are certain companies that are clearly very happily valued. Let's put it like that. But if we look at the industry as a whole, I think it's in a pretty healthy state.
But should investors be worried about what they're seeing in Wall Street? This is quite a dip.
Well, it's a dip of a very strong year, so some profit taking, I think, is to be expected. And if you separate it between names and names, we see a huge variance. You have a company like Nvidia, which is clearly have had a huge run, is very heavily valued. Then you see a company like IBM that is really leading in kind of the next wave within AI and quantum, still looking pretty attractive to me.
OK, so you've described it as profit-taking, and in fact, you're investing in an AI chip startup valued at $2 billion, backed by Microsoft and Qatar and Singapore, D-Matrix. That's a vote of confidence from you, isn't it?
Yeah, but this is an absolutely exceptional company. And what people need to understand is when we use artificial intelligence in business, there's one type of processor you need to train the large language models. There's another type of processors and intelligence you need to then actually ask the questions. And there will be millions more questions asked than it takes to train the models. So I think this is paving the way for a very important future.
Now, quantum computing can turbocharge AI. Can you first of all explain to our viewers why quantum computing is so important and whether you think it might be the next big thing?
Well, it is clearly very important, and already on a silicon level, we are facing very challenging quantum physical limits. And so this shift into a projected future of real quantum computers, I think is inevitable to happen. What I don't know is how fast it will happen. So right now we see great success in quantum sensing, understanding where, for instance, an airplane is around Earth without GPS signal. But actual quantum computers is still probably a couple of years out.
For the eagle-eyed viewers amongst you, that wasn't Michelle Fleury. That was Per Roman, a founding partner at Bullhound Capital, who's a well-known name in tech investing and remembers the dot-com boom and bust well. And he was just talking about the tech bubble. They're not bursting. Investors don't need to be as worried at the moment. That's his view, of course. Now, I want to take you to Brussels, where European Union finance ministers are meeting to try to agree on the EU's annual budget for 2026. They've also been discussing a plan to use frozen Russian assets to back loans to Ukraine. But perhaps the most controversial area, especially for people here in the UK, is the post-Brexit reset in Britain's relations with Europe. Some member states are demanding that the UK puts more money into the EU budget as the price of improved market access into the bloc. The UK is also keen that its defence companies can participate in a €140 billion fund to rearm Europe. But again, that is likely to come with a price tag. All things I discussed with David Hennig of the European Centre for International Political Economy.
Well, the UK government did sign up to giving contributions to the EU as part of the common understanding reached in May of this year. What was different between what was agreed in May and what was being discussed in November was the scale of the money to be paid and the purpose of it. So what some member states are arguing is that the UK should be paying into EU regional funds, and that wasn't what was agreed in May. But I think it is widely accepted that where the UK is going to get more access to EU markets, it is going to have to pay something for the privilege, and a large part of the discussions over the next year or two are going to be about how much that is.
And is it also fair to say that the UK cannot afford not to be part of a defence pact. So we think of BAE, Rolls-Royce, Babcock, etc.
Well, there are already defence agreements between some EU member states and UK companies, but clearly it would also be for the benefit of the UK defence industry to be part of the SAFE programme in the EU, which is basically borrowing a lot of money in order to fund new projects. Clearly, UK companies are interested, and equally, if this is EU borrowing, the UK government is expected to pay something towards the privilege. Now, there's only 2.5 weeks left before the first round of bids is due, and it is hoped UK and EU talks are concluded within that time. But that's obviously a very sharp deadline right now. But yes, they are discussing exactly that, how much money the UK would have to put in.
Finally, to one of the most famous voices in the world.
My name is Michael Caine. You know, I've played many roles in my life, both on and off the screen. But now, I've got a question for you. What makes a voice iconic?
Now, not a lot of people know that was part of a commercial for AI company 11 Labs. Acting legend Sir Michael Caine is one of the high-profile names to license his voice to 11 Labs, which this week launched a marketplace for voices for use by brands and businesses. It includes the voices of dead Hollywood stars such as John Wayne and Julie Garland, and also historical figures like J. Robert Oppenheimer to Maya Angelou and Alan Turing. A little earlier, I asked Lisa Martin, a tech analyst and former NASA scientist, how much of a game changer this new technology is.
It's absolutely a game changer. Thanks so much for having me here. You know, we're seeing not just the game changing, but we're seeing voices like Michael Caine, they're licensed voices used for a whole bunch of AI-powered experiences. This is both in entertainment and business. I think we're going to see three major use cases here. The first one is entertainment and media. That's going to include things like AI-narrated audiobooks and podcasts, virtual cameos in movies, video games. Imagine chatting with Michael Caine, for example. The second use case is brand and marketing campaigns. So like you were mentioning, brands can use this. Imagine personalized endorsements or virtual spokespeople roles that can scale globally, or campaigns that are localized to use the same celebrity voice in multiple languages. The third use case is something we're already seeing, and that's voice assistants and apps where we could have custom celebrity voices for navigation systems in our cars, in car assistants, our smart speakers. We could also even see fitness, meditation, or education apps using familiar voices to really drive that feel-good connection and deeper audience engagement.
And that's it. For more on the big budget U-turn, the implications and the secondary implications, go to bbc.com. But for now, stay with BBC News.